Intel community warned that the CIA could be behind efforts to meddle with the election. Here's One America's Pearson Sharp.
Members of America's intelligence community are raising red flags that the 2020 election is being outright stolen from the American people. Retired Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney, who was formerly the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, says 2 pieces of software called Hammer and Scorecard are being used by Democrats as a superweapon for voter fraud.
People must understand that this software was used to overturn the 2020 election. The first time in the United States' history that massive amounts of cyber warfare have been used in our voting system.
McInerney says the software was designed all the way back during President George W. Bush's first term in office.
Hammer is a surveillance software developed by the CIA. The programmer was Dennis Montgomery. He developed this in 2003 to go after radical Islamists. Scorecard is a program that was developed for CIA that manipulates voting booths.
McInerney explained Scorecard was intended to overturn elections in foreign countries to install leaders favorable to the United States. But then, under Obama, it was turned to an even more sinister purpose.
Well, that was done by the Obama administration 2 weeks after Obama came in 2009, February 3rd to be exact, moved it out of CIA into a secret skiff in Fort Washington, Maryland. And then they started listening on U.S. citizens to include chief justices, prominent Americans, politicians, etc. When that happened, Dennis Montgomery, who invented programs, became a whistleblower.
Under former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan, both Hammer and Scorecard were redesigned to target American citizens, specifically the left's political opponents like Donald Trump. This software is highly illegal, but with President Obama's blessing, these deep state operatives went to work on not only discrediting Donald Trump, but on undermining the 2012 and 2016 elections. The programs were countered in 2016, but now in 2020, they were successful and managed to sabotage the election of President Trump by instead reallocating his votes to Joe Biden. McInerney says it was primarily used in the battleground states and is evident in the massive vote dumps for Biden in the early hours of November 4th, the morning after Election Day.
We should be demanding from the president to expose these numbers publicly. You see news networks like Fox that are ignoring it. All the mainstream media, they flipped on us. They do not want to hear it. They won't let people like me on, and they don't want to hear anybody mention it. They discount it completely. But we know it's true because we watched it being prepped. They used it in the primaries.
McInerney believes if not for vote tampering, this would have been an overwhelming win for President Trump, but that this information must be given to the right judges so they can act on it, and quickly. If that doesn't happen, he predicts it could have dire consequences for future elections.
If Republicans lose this election, they will never win another one again. It will really be hammer and sickle, and that flag of Russia and the Soviet Union and communism will be flying in the United States. China and Russia and others will own us.
Pearson Sharp, One America News.
I'm your host, David Zhang. Is it really the first time Republicans and Trump have been aware of voting fraud? From the certain reports and evidences, can we tell that Trump's plan is moving forward? Is it really true that, like some people claim, Republicans have no idea that voting fraud would take place in this election? Or they're a plan in the making? Let's talk about it. From the sources we can gather, it seems that Trump has been laying a plan since after the Russian investigation. In the first part of the plan, remember this order? In 2018, Trump signed this executive order declaring national emergency related to Russian and Chinese hackers. During the 2018 midterm election, this executive order was aimed to reduce foreign influences in the election voting system. In the recent video, I had mentioned that the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is responsible, according to this order, to report to the president any signs of voting machines and voting system containing defects. What this order does is the 3 following points. 1. It says with the current evidences, we cannot conclude that there is election interference, but the machines and the systems used in the election have big security risks. What Trump did here is that although currently we do not have solid evidence to suggest voting integrity issues, it does not mean in the future there won't be any. 2. The methods and information sources and investigations regarding election security issues are kept secret. 3. The constitutional rights for individuals or collectives' properties is rendered ineffective here. In other words, properties can be taken regardless of constitution rights. If the raid on the Citadel and Dominion servers were true, then Trump is working on lawsuits, but also working secretly to begin operations that would treat the parties involved as treason. What do I mean? So Trump may have already been planning this for at least since 2018 to do something big in 2020. Let me explain the second part of the plan. Fire Head of Defense Department Mark Esper. Install new counter-terrorist expert Christopher C. Miller. He also stopped Gina Haspel, the CIA director, from attending daily briefings. Here you have to know the difference between the CIA and the FBI. FBI is about domestic investigations. The CIA is all about intelligence and foreign information. Barring Haspel from attending these meetings is a sign that Trump wants to operate without CIA noticing. Trump wants to protect his resources, his intelligence information, and ensure the highest confidentiality. The most recent was the termination of CISA director Chris Krebs, who got fired yesterday by Trump's for claiming that the election is the most secure in history. CISA is responsible for election-related issues. Trump is removing all of the highest leadership positions or rendering them inaccessible to intelligence. In other words, the White House is operating without the knowledge of the CIA, DHS, or potentially FBI. At the same time, Biden's team is so eager to get in on the presidential daily briefing. We had a whole controversy regarding that recently. Biden wanted to be in on the daily intelligence briefing for the president, even before he was certified as the president. Trump is not allowing that to happen as another way to suffocate information access to the Democrat side. This is again to avoid losing information or leaking their next move. According to Larry Johnson on the Gateway Pundit, that the German server was apparently inside a CIA facility in Europe rather than Citadel. Keep in mind that we cannot verify this as of now. But if you're asking why would the American election server be installed in a CIA facility, does this have any grounds? Well, technically yes. First of all, normally you cannot operate on foreign soil without permission. Storing voting information in a CIA facility is far more secure than any other companies or properties. So if the server was inside an American facility, it does not require access permissions. If that is true, then this operation to seize the server was done without the CIA knowing. How? The CIA should have been the one to do the raid themselves, since they are responsible for foreign intels. But they weren't. Why? Because there are Democrat informants in the CIA who can keep an eye on it and would know Trump's move immediately, which means that the Biden camp and the legacy media would know too. Trump skipped the CIA and went directly to the military through Christopher Miller, who has his longtime operatives that are loyal to him, directly go and raid the server. And if Trump did this on the basis of treason and national security, it would warrant and justify the raid based on point 3 of the executive order that I just mentioned. You can go take the server directly without any repercussion and does not violate rights to property. According to Larry Johnson, such an operation would have been carried out with US law enforcement present to take custody of the evidence. This is not the first time. Johnson says a retired DEA officer told him about an incident where he entered a CIA facility in Frankfurt backed up by the US Army to get info the CIA was withholding that took place in the 1980s. So what happens to the server and its evidence? Well, it is taken to the Department of Justice based on the executive order and will be presented as court evidences by a US attorney. Now it is getting to a point where Sidney Powell has been mentioning to collect massive amounts of evidence to the point beyond reasonable doubt, which means Trump wants to take this to the point where so much evidence can prove what has been happening in this election with voter fraud without rebuttal. Now let's talk about what CIA and Smartmatics are doing. In the 2017 video, Smartmatic's director Antonio Mujica actually admitted to the Associated Press in a video that election in Venezuela had voter turnouts manipulated. According to him, the reason many election security issues go undetected is because of a lack of cybersecurity and audit. He says auditors need to be at every step for election security to occur. So the estimated participation rate and the official authorities' numbers are about 1 million votes difference. Keep in mind, he did not admit to Smartmatics being the one who manipulated the data, nor did he say that voter fraud took place. However, it again aligns with what legacy media has reported before in the past years, that election security issues are real, that machines can be accessed by hackers or other means to manipulate votes, which they're now saying the opposite, saying there is no election fraud. But this does indicate that voter turnout numbers can be easily manipulated, at least, by anyone who has access to the network. So this company, Smartmatics, along with Dominion, made their way into the US. Right under the radar of the FBI and the CIA with its massive global intelligence net. How did that not get detected by them? Suspicious acts, right? Or did they just choose to ignore it? And why would they do that? In the interview with Maria Bartiromo on November 15th, Sidney Powell was extremely angry at the fact that Gina Haspel is still the director of CIA. Since 2018, when she took the role, there have been many reports of election systems from these companies containing security risks. Does she and the CIA not know? Or of course they do. I won't list the report since we already talked about them in our previous videos, but they refuse to act on it. Why is that? Well, see, CNN did a report on DEF CON hacking conference in 2017. There was an idea by Jake Braun to hack voting machines. So let me talk about who he is. From 2009 to 2011, Braun served as the White House liaison to US Department of Homeland Security. He has also served as National Deputy Field Director for Obama for America in 2008 and as the Michigan Field Director for John Kerry in 2004. Why did he expose the voting machine security issues in 2017? Because that was when the Russian Gate was happening. They desperately wanted to use this type of events to show that it was easy for Russian hackers to hack into machines in order to prove that Trump was colluding with Russia, although it would potentially cost Dominion, the company, its downfall. It was a worthy sacrifice to bring Trump down at the moment. Little did they know in 2020, they would go 180 on their words and full on calling the opposite, saying that this election was the most secure. We'll have to keep an eye on how Trump plays his cards in the coming weeks. And that is it for today.
The election was a thought-out plan formulated by certain forces that has been conspiring to overthrow the U.S. government since 20 years ago. On November 16th, Linwood tweeted that Joe Biden and many others won nothing more than a long prison term. Many people don't like uncertainty and have become impatient as they wait for the truth. He reminded people to stay strong and to believe in the truth, because the left's agenda, which includes limiting and controlling information, is wearing people down. Linwood said it's not quite war yet with the enemy, but he said there will soon be action and they will be victorious. This is a fight for freedom for ourselves, for our families, and for the future generations, and the truth will always triumph over the lies. On the evening of November 16th, Donald Trump tweeted, "Big victory moments ago in the state of Nevada. The all-Democrat county commissioner race on the same ballot as the president was just thrown out because of large-scale voter discrepancy. Clark County officials do not have confidence in their own election security. Moreover, the ballot used in the election was the same type of ballot used in the presidential election." Looking only at Trump's tweets, many of us would be unclear as to what he is referring to. Now let's take a deeper look. Trump's tweets should be referring to the District C election in Clark County, Nevada, where the vote count is 1/6 of the total in Clark County, which is the most populous county in Nevada. The race for County Commission District C was between Republican candidate Stavros Anthony and Democratic candidate Ross Miller. A total of 153,000 votes were cast in District C. Miller, a Democrat, won but led by only 10 votes. However, the Clark County office found that 139 votes were problematic. For example, 6 people voted twice in Las Vegas, the county seat, and those 139 votes were enough to overturn the election. Therefore, the entire election in District C was thrown out. Trump said it was a big win because the county's approach had a positive effect on Trump's legal battle in the presidential election. Because there exists a lot of controversial voting numbers in a number of key states, and because the outcomes of these controversial votes in key states can completely reverse the election's outcome, then citing the established case of Nevada, the election results in these places should be at least considered invalid. And Trump also tweeted that they will file a major lawsuit which could make the entire 2020 presidential election become invalid. On November 16th, Attorney Powell of Trump's legal team released a testimony that gives us an idea of the extent of this election fraud. This testimony comes from a personal bodyguard of former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, who has accused 3 company executives from Smartmatic, a Venezuelan election software system, of conspiring with Chavez and the president of the country's electoral commission. The bodyguard was present at many of their meetings and even directly helped set up and organize them. Chavez was a key figure in dragging affluent Venezuela into a socialist abyss, and the good days of Venezuelans ended since the day he took power. Winning 4 consecutive presidential elections between 1999 and 2013, Chavez was consistently in power, winning the 4 consecutive presidential elections until his death in 2013. But each time there was suspicion, and this time, in the process of exposing the fraud in the US election, even Chavez's history of election fraud has been revealed. Chavez's personal guard said he witnessed the birth and operation of Smartmatic, a sophisticated electronic election operating system that allows Chavez to manipulate large numbers of ballots, both local and national, and to direct the ballot system to elect his preferred candidates in order to stay in power. As a result, Chavez has never lost an election, and in fact, with Smartmatic software, not only can he ensure that he wins the election, but he can also manipulate the election of a mayor, a township, a Congress, or an election within his party. Moreover, Smartmatic created a program that allows voters to be anonymized in the voting system, so that after the election results are in, there is no way to trace back to exactly who voted. In other words, it makes it difficult to verify the votes later. In 2013, after Chavez's death, Nicolas Maduro, also a socialist, ran in a so-called election on April 14th of that year to become Chavez's successor. In the election, Maduro's opponent, Compilation Radonsky, was ahead of Maduro by 2 million votes on the afternoon of that day. And Maduro, seeing that he was going to lose, ordered almost all Venezuela to go offline for 2 hours to change the results of the vote, during which time Smartmatic switched votes from Radonsky over to Maduro. When the network was restarted, it turned into a 200,000 vote lead for Maduro's opponent, a slim margin, but Maduro won the election. Maduro's victory reminds us not only of what happened on election night in the United States this year, but the similarities are uncanny. At midnight on November 3rd, at least 5 US states with Dominion voting systems abruptly stopped counting votes. Before the vote count stopped, Trump had a clear advantage, but the next morning, the situation changed dramatically. Some states that stopped counting votes at midnight, such as Wisconsin and Michigan, turned from red to blue, and then Pennsylvania also turned blue. For the United States, the Guard's more serious accusation is that the Dominion voting system, which was widely used in this election in the United States and other voting software systems, are based on the infrastructure design of the Smartmatic system, which is derived from the election operation mechanisms of the Venezuelan dictator. In short, the Guard said, the Smartmatic mechanism is in the DNA of all voting software systems in the United States. The methodology and software design of the Dominion system for storing and transmitting and calculating voter ID data and voting data is essentially the same as Smartmatic, and Dominion is also in business with Smartmatic, making it difficult for the average person to detect traces of the ballot tampering. As early as the Chavez era, the Smartmatic election operating system was widely exported, including Bolivia, Nicaragua, Argentina, Chile, and others. More suspiciously, Peter Neffenger, a retired U.S. general who served as chairman of the Smartmatic's board of directors, joined Biden's transition team in the Department of Homeland Security after Biden declared himself as president-elect. Powell recently told Fox News that Dominion and Smartmatic voting systems were created to rig elections, and she strongly criticized the negligence of the CIA and FBI, with some of them even being directly involved in the election fraud. One of the striking observations is that both the CIA and the FBI have received many reports of Dominion election fraud, and yet these agencies have done nothing about it. Powell also expressed that this makes her wonder how much the CIA has used these fraudulent election systems for their own benefits. In a previous interview, she said that Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, should be fired. Using computer technology to cheat has become the main method used by leftists in this election. But this is not all. There are still other fraudulent behaviors that are continuing to be exposed. Everyone knows about the famous American rapper, Kanye West, suddenly announced his candidacy for president on July 4th this year, but it was too late into the presidential race. However, some people still went ahead and voted for Kanye by putting his name in the write-in section because they liked him. Now, here is the problem. Michigan's Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, mandated that all unauthorized ballots have to be canceled. But witnesses allege that on the ballot for Kanye West, if a voter voted for a Democratic candidate in a column other than the presidential candidates, the staff would mark the ballot directly for Biden. The report said that there were several thousand ballots in this category. In another case, on November 17th, the District Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, California, issued an official announcement regarding the news that 2 Latinos have submitted over 800,000 fraudulent voter registration applications on behalf of homeless people. And this is not the only case. The Buffalo Chronicle published an exclusive story on November 14th that exposed a similar and more shocking act. The Buffalo Chronicle, citing information from an anonymous associate, said that Philadelphia's Italian mob leader, Joey Merlino, otherwise known as Skinny Joe, is willing to testify before Congress about how the Biden team cheated in Philadelphia to steal the election in exchange for a full expungement of his past criminal record from President Trump. This is because Merlano wants a clean background record so he can go fish and hunt on federal land and get a job with the National Park Services. On November 3rd, a few hours before the polls closed, Democrats in the Philadelphia election office provided Merlino with boxes of blank ballots, which Merlino transported to 2 private residences in South Philadelphia, where several of Merlino's men were paid to fill out the ballots around the clock. To think that working at McDonald's, you may get as little as $10 an hour for your hard work, but here, you can get $10 for filling out a single ballot. More money than any ordinary job can offer. So these people could fill out more than 3,000 ballots per hour. According to the whistleblower, they worked almost continuously for 60 hours. So let's exaggerate here a little bit and say 3,000 ballots per hour for 60 hours, then Merlino's men could have filled out 180,000 ballots for the Democratic Party and earned $1.8 million, enough to have an impact on the election results. The whistleblower said the Democrats wanted Merlino to finish the job in 3 days and paid him a total of $3 million. After the ballots were filled out, they were packaged up and sent to the Philadelphia Convention Center to be counted. So far, the difference between Trump and Biden in Pennsylvania is only about 70,000 votes. If Merlino is really willing to testify in Congress as a whistleblower and the 100,000 or so votes he took part in forgery are thrown out, then it would be enough to turn Pennsylvania red. But a new question arises. Where did the Democrats get the money to make the votes? Let's look at a case that may or may not be relevant, but can give us some clues. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, is sued by the Thomas More Society, a national public interest law firm, over allegations that Zuckerberg donated large sums of money in an attempt to influence elections. For example, a 2015 nonprofit organization called the Center for Tech and Civic Life, or CTCL for short, focused on voter education and skill trainings for election workers. The organization's executive director is Tiana F. Johnson, who in 2018 attended an inaugural class of Obama's Foundation Fellows. According to the Epoch Times, a group of Wisconsin voters filed a complaint that the Wisconsin Election Commission against an activist group funded by Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, claiming that election assistance grants it gave to the Democrats-dominated cities violated state law in an attempt to unfairly influence the outcome of the November election. The complainant, Wisconsin Voter Alliance, is an unincorporated association of voters based in Semico, Wisconsin, that desires to have clean and fair elections in the state of Wisconsin, according to the legal complaint. The Alliance claims that grants allocated by the Zuckerberg Support Center for Tech and Civic Life, CTCL, favors Democrats because they went to the electoral apparatus in 5 Wisconsin cities: Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, Milwaukee, and Racine, which past data shows votes overwhelmingly for Democrats. The CTCL is a left-leaning election reform nonprofit based in Chicago. Before the 2020 election, the organization was only able to get about $700,000 a year in donations, but this year Zuckerberg donated at least $350 million to the organizations, and much of that money has since gone to local election offices. Similar private donations have also been funneled into key areas of the campaign. According to Ballotpedia, the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area alone received at least $10 million in donations, and that's just a small fraction of it. Currently, there is a growing concern about the interference of large tech giants from the West Coast of the United States in American politics and even in elections. Republican Senator Josh Hawley questioned Facebook CEO Zuckerberg in a hearing on November 17th. According to the testimony of a former Facebook employee, Facebook staff members were involved in a joint effort with Twitter and Google to make decisions about censorship and modification of certain websites and content. In the testimony, it was noted that Facebook, Google, and Twitter have an internal project management system called Tasks, where they can communicate with each other to censor content. For example, on the Facebook side, if a suggestion for censorship is found on the platform, the other two parties can follow up and coordinate their censorship efforts. Zuckerberg did not acknowledge the existence of the platform, but said that it was a list of tasks between the three companies to address some security concerns, such as terrorist attacks or foreign interventions. However, Google and Twitter have not yet taken a position on the matter as of the time of our broadcast. While people start to be worried about the shady dealings of the West Coast tech giants, some of the East Coast's biggest Wall Street financiers have already come out in support of Trump. On November 14th, the Financial Times reported that Stephen Schwarzman, the founder of Blackstone Group, a leading Wall Street private equity and investment management firm, participated in a network of meetings with executives from over 30 major companies on November 6th. These companies include Goldman Sachs, Johnson & Johnson, Comcast, Walmart, and some other Fortune 500 firms. Schwarzman's remarks were leaked to the Financial Times by some of the participants in the meeting. In the conference, Schwarzman warned that Trump has the right to challenge the election results and that the U.S. is on the brink of a coup d'etat, and Schwarzman predicted that Trump's legal battles would proceed accordingly. Schwarzman also asked other attendees if they were surprised that the Pennsylvania vote suddenly turned in Biden's favor. He also mentioned that many of the votes were delivered after the election and they contained fraudulent ballot issues that would have to be resolved in court. In response, BlackRock stated, "As an American, Steve believes the electoral system is sound and that the democratic process will play out in an orderly and legal manner, as it has throughout the nation's history." In addition to these major Wall Street firms, a popular talk show host, Mark Levin, has come forward with a list of issues that will harm America if Biden takes office. In a series of tweets on the morning of November 17th, Mark Levin said that Biden would sell out the United States once in office. Among the many examples he cited were that Biden would bring back the U.S. back into the Paris Peace Accords, impose unionism throughout the country, rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, pay millions of dollars to Palestine terrorists, open the floodgates to illegal immigration, massively increase taxes, reimpose critical race theory training, and ignore BLM and Antifa violence, and using taxpayers' money to extensively support abortion. And in the midst of an epidemic, Biden's possible solution would be the lockdown of the entire United States. And this is just the beginning. At this moment, the Trump administration is continuing its plan to intensify its crackdown on the Chinese Communist Party. The White House has repeatedly stated that it is not even considering Biden being elected and is preparing for Trump's re-election. Trump is also preparing for his second term in office and making internal staff arrangements. On November 17th, German media reported that Trump may appoint Corey Stewart to a key position in the Commerce Department to help him implement a series of tough policies against the Chinese Communist Party.
We are in the midst of losing our country. Too many of us are rewarding the left by submitting to their tactics of violence and intimidation. If we do not remain brave and bold, I promise you, we will lose this election. We will lose our country. Look at what's going on in Michigan's Wayne County, where the election board refused to certify the election results for Detroit. The reason? Because absentee ballot poll books are out of balance in 70% of Detroit's 134 counting stations without explanation, meaning the ballot count does not match the voter rolls. What more evidence of fraud do you need? But 2 hours after refusing to certify the results, the two Republicans on the board reversed course last night. They certified it. The reality is they bowed to the angry mob that overwhelmed the public comment phase of the certification process. Wayne State University Administrator Ned Stabler's disgusting comments went viral last night. Take a look.
But just know when you try to sleep tonight that millions of people around the world now on Twitter know the name Monica Palmer and William Hartman as two people completely racist and without an understanding of what integrity means or a shred of human decency.
You hear what he says? When you try to sleep tonight, that implies people will be banging down your door. No one deserves this kind of treatment, and yet, after all the cries of racism, even in the face of evidence of real fraud, the left-wing social media goons picked the white guy from Detroit, Ned Stabler, as their viral video spokesperson of the night. But there were plenty of potentially viral moments to choose from, all disappointing. Let me show you what these two Republicans were really up against before they caved to the despicable showing of intimidation by Detroit Democrats.
We are going to come for your heads. You guys are not right. You are unethical.
Your issue, William Harmon and Monica Palmer, is that you're racist.
We're no longer going to sit around and let white people take advantage of black people. Your day is coming. Have a good day.
We are still live streaming to make sure your racism and bigotry is permanently on the public record.
If she did not want to take this lashing, she should have voted to certify these votes.
Do you see what their method is here? We are coming for your heads. Your day is coming. If you don't want to take this lashing, then do what we demand. That, folks, is not democracy. It is mob rule, and it won last night in Michigan. I only use last night's events as an example because this is happening across the country. Just talk to Trump supporters. They'll all tell you, leading up to the election, they were afraid to put a Trump-Pence sign in their front yard, fearing vandals would destroy their homes or cars. People who put Biden signs out had nothing to fear, and everyone out there knows it. Try eating on a patio in a major city in America, and you risk being terrorized by Black Lives Matter rioters on the warpath. Though you put a BLM shirt on, and guess what? You can walk down the street freely, free of fear. Carry a flag, though. Wear a red hat or a red shirt. You risk being sucker punched. This is what we call the silencing of conservative America, and it is well underway. The intimidation is stifling freedom, the freedom to even do what is right. That's what happened in Wayne County. In the face of false results, pervasive and systematic fraud, 234 sworn affidavits by those who say they witnessed election tampering, the board bowed down and certified the election anyway, passing the buck and calling on the state to investigate. Good luck in Governor Whitmer's Michigan. This is a woman who actually applauded the intimidation that I just showed you.
I just want to give kudos to all of the activists who organized and waited in line to have their comments heard. I think that they really changed the outcome here. And I have every expectation that as this goes to the State Board of Canvassers next week, that the process of finalizing the results will be completed.
Kudos to the activists. They were making threats. Yes, the governor of Michigan, like most of her fellow radicals in power, approve of the threatening tactics. It's why those tactics now flourish in this country. Once again, the intimidators can claim victory. Yes, folks, it takes courage to stand up to this vile, un-American behavior. But as long as we freedom-loving Americans have freedom in this country, I implore you, you must stand up to it. Because if you don't, they win, and America loses. And that, folks, is just not an option that I'm okay with, and I'm sure you're not either.
Now, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, that's the age-old philosophical thought experiment about perception and observation. But after this weekend, we can modify it this way. If a Trump march draws tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of peaceful, patriotic people to Washington, and no one's around to report it, did it really occur? Well, it was billed as the Million MAGA March. That's more than tens of thousands. And you look at it by the overhead shots, it could be one of the biggest grassroots protests the Capitol has ever seen. Attendees were families, young, old, black, white, Hispanic, They came from near and far, all to support the America First agenda and to stand with the man who has endured so much in order to lead the movement.
Winning Trump forever. For the very first time I voted. And I voted for Donald J. Trump.
He's fought through thick and thin. He's been bombarded with one thing after another, you know, and the American people know it, you know, and you can see by the support.
We got to make sure our president get back in that office 4 more years.
Now, it's a fair guess that most in that gigantic crowd are convinced that Trump won the election. And it's likewise reasonable for them to conclude that they don't have much trust in the U.S. media. Now, pockets, by the way, were even chanting against this news channel for what they perceive as election night bias against the president. Others were rightfully outraged that few networks were even carrying the rally at all. And the ones who did were only interested in insulting the attendees.
The president's supporters, they poured into the streets of Washington this weekend to try to give life to these unfounded and baseless claims of a rigged election. How did this become normal?
I think with some of these demonstrators, good luck getting a clear or fact-based, logical answer to some of the questions you're posing.
These people are fundamentally a joke. These aren't serious people. These are members of a cult. I hope they get frostbite.
I hope they get frostbite, is what he said. Now, remember, these talking heads are some of the kind, tolerant, unifying, and loving people that Biden and Harris claim make up their movement. Well, 73 million people voted for President Trump, and it's not too much for them to expect, is it, that the media treat them fairly and respectfully. Likewise, it's not too much for them to expect that only legal votes will be counted, and that their votes must not be nullified due to fraud. Now, for years now, I've been speaking about this type of honest, hardworking Americans who came to Washington over the weekend. And throughout this time, the so-called elites in our nation's capital have responded to the legitimate concerns of American citizens with mockery and contempt. It's dumbfounding to me that the media and Democrats still don't understand what a stupid strategy it is to alienate and dismiss all of these Americans. I think they're making the same mistake they made back in 2009 and 2010 when the much smaller Tea Party movement started.
You see the Tea Party movement as a real political force this year?
Look, it seems to be a very successful private enterprise.
Nobody actually knows what they're for. We just know what they are against.
It's not about taxes. This is about hating a black man in the White House.
We call it AstroTurf. It's not really a grassroots movement.
Those of you who are watching certain news channels that on which I'm not very popular, and you see folks waving tea bags around.
They thought that all that condescension would make the movement go away. But it only made the Tea Party stronger. Less than 2 years after those insults, Republicans took control of the House in 2010. Now, some of the Tea Party candidates included those little-known people, Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Tim Scott, and Mike Lee. And 4 years later, the GOP took control of the Senate. 2 years after that, Donald Trump was elected president. Now, the difference between the Tea Party then and President Trump's movement now is that this movement now has a lot more clarity about what it wants. The same Trump economic and foreign policy agenda that led to higher wages, fewer wars. And whatever the final Electoral College tally is in this election, this movement has a proven track record of success on everything from achieving our energy independence to challenging China, to fast-tracking a COVID vaccine, to raising family incomes. The results were so impressive that not only did President Trump broaden his coalition among working-class Americans, but he helped grow the party's numbers in the House. When all those vaunted media experts with all their credentials were predicting the opposite. They claimed Trump was going to shrink the party, remember that? Especially among minorities. Wrong again.
Blacks and Latinos are doing much better under Trump versus Obama. Yeah, absolutely.
Opportunity zones, which is something that, in my opinion, is the largest economic empowerment program for the black community since probably Reconstruction.
We've done a lot of things, and I've been seeing a lot of business come to my neighborhood. I've been seeing a lot of black people own homes.
Why couldn't the networks find these people to interview? They were there. We found them. In a Biden administration, that you just saw, all those gains, are going to be flushed down the toilet. His handlers, who are basically all the old Obama staffers, believe in something called the Great Reset of capitalism. I told you about this last week. It's a plan to force a more equitable distribution of global resources. Translation, most Americans will have less freedom and less money, except for the same elites who always find a way around the rules. Like during the lockdowns, when the families of these mini tyrants skirted the restrictions. Just last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom was dining with a prohibited number of pals at that exclusive restaurant, the French Laundry. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot was caught partying maskless in a massive crowd celebrating Biden's unofficial election win. No problem at all. And Pelosi, well, she was going to have a big congressional soiree until she was shamed into canceling it. The American people are onto these frauds. The MAGA marchers certainly couldn't have been clearer about what COVID lockdowns and restrictions have done to America.
It's like, and what Trump said in the beginning, the cure can't be worse than the disease itself. People, we still need to go on.
Trying to finish off any business that was able to hang on by the skin of their teeth, and the last closures, they'll finish them off.
People are hurting. Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, they all talk about caring about the American people, but you shut this country down for 4 to 6 weeks, and you're going to it'll be the final nail in the coffin for a lot of small businesses.
100% true. But so far, Joe Biden and his handlers aren't listening. Biden loves to talk about dignity and unity and respect. But the time for talk is over and the time for action is here. Because if Biden really wanted to unite the country, he wouldn't even be entertaining the idea of destroying our current economic recovery with another devastating lockdown or series of lockdowns. If Biden really wanted to unite the country, he would not dismiss the concerns of tens of millions of Americans about mail-in voting. Instead, he'd do something like, appoint a bipartisan commission to answer every question about how this election was conducted and to make certain that we will never have to wait so long for an accurate count. And if Joe Biden really wanted to unite the country, he would have personally and on camera condemn the BLM and Antifa thugs who beat, kicked, and harassed Trump supporters on Saturday. He has done none of these things. He still hopes this movement's just going to go away. But that's not going to happen. Here are a few hard truths for Joe Biden, his handlers, and his enablers in the press corps. You know who you are. The pro-Trump throngs didn't show up in D.C. on Saturday because of conservative media, because we told them to. They showed up knowing they could be physically attacked for doing so because they love America. And lying about them, insulting them, ignoring them will only incite more violence and more resentment and opposition. All Americans deserve to be heard, to be seen, and to be safe. It's the least a government can do for its citizens. And that's the angle.